Right. Good morning and welcome, everyone. My name is Janelle Carlin. I'm the Director of Quality Science and Food Innovation at Pulse Canada, and I'll be moderating today's session. I'm very excited to welcome you to our webinar on gluten-free crackers, highlighting innovation with lentil flour. I'm joined today by my colleague Tanya Durr, Director of Diversification and Market Insights with Pulse Canada, who will be providing an overview of market trends and innovation examples across the category. We're also joined by Amy Dahl, the research manager with Prairie Research Kitchen, and as well as Anna Heimers, the Red Seal chef and research technician with Prairie Research Kitchen. Anna and Amy will be walking through a recent collaborative study that we've just wrapped up exploring lentil flour use in snack crackers. So before we begin, I have a couple housekeeping items to walk through. We will be reserving time at the end of the webinar for questions. So throughout the presentation, you may write down your question into the Q&A tab. If you see a question posed by another audience member that you'd also like the answer to, you're able to vote to prioritize a previously asked question. We will also be circulating a recording of the webinar to registrants after. And I did want to highlight a new function in the platform called Docs, which you can click on that tab and access a report highlighting some of the key results from the research that will be presented here today. So to kick things off, I'm going to get Tanya to join me, and she will start off the webinar.
Great. Well, thank you, Janelle. Thank you for the introduction. And I will set the stage for today's webinar by introducing pulses in the snack cracker category. Now, snack crackers are typically a staple food stored in our pantries, and it's consumed globally. And so consumers worldwide have different preferences and different eating occasions, and this really makes a unique challenge for product developers. So today, I am going to start off the webinar providing a landscape of the category, just a market landscape. I'll show where pulses fit, as well as highlight some global lentil innovations in this category. So now, before diving in, though, I wanted to define what we mean by snack crackers. So savory biscuits is a term that's used to describe this category, which refers to the non-sweet biscuits and crackers that we are referring to. And this includes cream crackers, aperitifs, or these smaller size savory biscuits, even with ones that have the cream fillings. It also includes bread substitutes. So this is, for example, it's crisp breads, stick breads, croutons, and etc. So a lot of these are shown in the images on this slide here. And diving right into the market landscape, when we look at the different regions here, the global biscuit market is a $31 billion industry. So it's a smaller sized industry, and it may be niche, but it's consumed globally. And the volumes are shown here in the bars, and it's showing modest growth year on year. And this retail value in the line is increasing more quickly, and it is projected to grow. So we see this, volume growth that's more moderate, and we see this increasing retail value. So really, the value is growing more quickly than the volume, suggesting that higher costs and maybe some higher price points is what we're experiencing, which might result in more of a tight market with increasing competition for brands and really the brands really need to demonstrate value. And so I think this is an opportunity to look at ways to invigorate the category. And today we're going to be talking about pulses. So just looking at the different regions, North America is a significant market, making up 32% of that global market value for crackers. So it was a $31 billion industry. North America makes up 32% of that pie. You can see in that little pie graph there that Western Europe is at 22%, followed by Latin America and Asia Pacific. Now, however, when we look at purely volume demand, so that's the middle square there, the global market is 5.4 million tons of product. And Asia Pacific makes up a big chunk of that. So 28% of that global market volume for cracker consumption is in Asia Pacific, and it's been growing at a CAGR of 2.7% over the last 5 years, and then the forecast growth is at 5.5% CAGR, and that's between 2025 and 2030. So it's a bigger volume, and it's growing quite significantly. It has grown and growing more significantly. Lastly, on the right, I think Europe, we want to mention that Europe does make up 58% of new pulse-based cracker launches globally. So that means that there's more than half of the global innovations in the cracker market is in Europe. And so it makes Europe a really interesting market to explore. Okay, so this graph is a little different here, but this graph depicts what I just mentioned in the previous slide. So it's a really snapshot of the volume and innovation that's happening in the cracker market. The left graph here shows the share of global cracker demand, and the right is the innovation share. So it's volume versus how much innovation is happening in the category. Working in the food industry, it's important to look at both demand from a volume perspective, and we want to see what's actually happening from an innovation standpoint. So while markets like in North America and Asia are quite big markets from a volume perspective and value, Europe is the market leader in pulse innovation. So you can see the Europe at the bottom there with a blue bar being much bigger on the innovation share graph. Latin America is also consumes quite a bit of crackers from a volume perspective. The graph on the right shows a smaller innovation level of innovation. Okay, so now from a consumer perspective, consumers want better for you crackers. This is a Mintel 2025 report. It surveyed consumers across all of these different regions. Some few highlights are that 70% of cracker consumers in the UK say that crackers made with healthy ingredients such as vegetables and pulses appeal to them. That's a significant percentage. In Asia, 34% of biscuit consumers in India particularly say high in protein content is an important purchasing factor. And then in North America, 28% of US cracker consumers say all natural ingredients are important when selecting which crackers to buy. So overall, better for you crackers is an area that brands can innovate on. So we talked about the market landscape. I wanted to highlight where pulses fit. Just a quick snapshot of how pulses are faring in this category. But before we go in, I wanted to highlight, we're going to be talking about lentils specifically, but just why pulses in this category. Nutrition, health, clean label, those top 3 points are very key. Lentils play a really they present a really good opportunity to add value to this category. Sustainability, pulses play have a great story. They have a great story to tell with their low carbon and water footprints. Versatility is key for companies seeking multi-purpose ingredients, not only for nutrition, but to achieve that clean label, and then having those functional properties such as textural effects or browning properties. And last but not least, pulses have a continuous stream of supply. That's important. When you're innovating, it's a global crop relevant to many regions, and consumers recognize pulses. Their awareness and acceptance for pulses is quite high. So that's a real plus, and make a good ingredient for cracker formulations. Now, when we talk about pulses, there's a diversity of pulses. There's peas, lentils, chickpeas, and dry faba beans. And these are legumes, and they can be cooked and consumed in their whole seed format. Or in the case of cracker products, they can be milled into a flour or paste, and then they can also be separated into their protein, starches, and fibers. So you have lots of options for different ingredients that have unique functionality, which we're going to be talking about in the next half of our webinar. But I wanted to show how these ingredients are faring in the industry. So this graph here shows the evolution of pulse ingredient use in crackers and biscuits over time. I will interchange using crackers and biscuits throughout this presentation. We call this new cracker launches. So the top ingredients that are found in cracker products on pack are chickpeas, lentils, peas, as well as pea proteins. And what we're seeing here is that it's still a pretty niche ingredient in this category. We're seeing some modest growth for most of these pulse ingredients. Chickpeas are on top. Um, um, while you see lentils, which is the second most frequently used pulsed ingredient in cracker formulations, it's emerging as a dominant pulse ingredient. So I think with any pulse ingredients or emerging ingredients, there's a lot of volatility, but we can see that peas, pea protein, beans, as well as faba beans are gaining some traction in the industry. So there's a lot of different ingredients from pulses that can be used in cracker formulations, and we're seeing that in the commercial space. So why pulses in crackers? So this here is percent of new pulse cracker launches that have various claims, such as gluten-free or protein and fiber claims. I just pulled these out, select examples. And gluten-free is an obvious one. That's the blue bar. It stands out across all these regions. So in Europe, 54% of all pulse cracker launches was positioned as gluten-free. So that's more than half. In North America, you can see that gluten-free does drive pulse use, but it's less pronounced at 14%. And fiber and protein positioning is leveraged more in Europe. So that's the mustard, the yellow and green bars. So it's leveraged. These claims are leveraged more in Europe and less so in North America. And this could potentially be due to the labeling limitations in that region. So there's different drivers for using pulse ingredients in crackers, and gluten-free still seems to be a big one. Okay, now when introducing new ingredients, it's important to understand consumer perceptions. And so this is a quick summary of a study that we had done last year. So Pulse Canada commissioned a study to explore the familiarity of lentils by consumers in the UK, Germany, and the USA. And in summary, nearly 30% of consumers in these countries are already eating lentils every week, which is a pretty strong number. 50% or 56% of consumers recognize lentils as healthy and nutritious. And so there's a really strong halo effect around lentils. And in addition to this, there's strong interest to see lentils in more innovative formats, such as pastas, bakery products, snacks, which include crackers, as well as burgers. So lots of opportunity to explore lentils in these different applications. And so we're going to talk about lentils a bit more specifically. So I will walk through some innovations, global innovations in the cracker biscuit category. Now, typically, pulses are blended. They can be consumed on their own, but they're typically blended with other ingredients, such as cereal grains, nuts, oil seeds, and tubers. This graph here shows the frequency to which new cracker launches are formulated with a pulse blend. And so, for example, crackers with you see potato there, when you blend a pulse potato blend, we're seeing about roughly 100 launches in the past 5 years. So there's different combinations that you can look at. Look at rice, corn, potato, tapioca are in fact the top gluten-free flours that are blended with pulses in cracker formulations. We have, if you move up the chart, you see things like oat, soy, buckwheat, quinoa. They appear a little bit more niche, but they're quite commonly blended with pulses, particularly for enhanced nutrition and functionality. And I wanted to also note that while gluten-free is an important driver, you see that wheat is at the bottom of that graph. It's a major flour that's blended with pulses in cracker applications. So that number there is just the frequency of new launches, but 40% of all pulse-based cracker launches still contained a wheat. So it's a significant proportion. So it's not exclusively gluten-free. Many brands are leveraging pulses to enhance their wheat-based formulations as well. Okay, so just moving along here, I have a few examples in Europe. Here are some cracker formulations with pulse cereal or a seed flour blend for improved nutrition. Most of these products position the protein and fiber. And if you look at the product on the left, this is a gluten-free lentil cracker made with 66% red lentil, with a blend of 16% sesame. It's a source of protein, and it's also high in fiber, with 22% protein and 8% fiber. The product in the middle is by Doria. It's a red lentil cracker made with a blend of wheat and barley flours with a 25% lentil flour. So it has that nice ratio of pulse cereal blend. It's 100% natural and makes a claim for source of protein and rich in fiber. Also, it's free from flavors and nut colors, and that red lentil really brings that golden hue to the product. On the right, we have Boost Nutrition. It's a lentil toast, they call it, but it's a puff product, but it's made with a blend of lentil, a high proportion of lentil at 82% with tapioca, buckwheat, quinoa, and it's puffed into a nice little lentil toast. Also high in fiber and protein. So just moving on to Asia here, we have a lot of interest in fortification and fiber enrichment. So it's really just better for you claims on biscuits and crackers in Asia. And so this graph here is the percent of new launches that have a certain claim. So in the case of the blue and the yellow bars, it's vitamins and high fiber. 4% of all new launches carry these claims. And then you have some other claims such as calcium and protein is a bit lower in this region. So this is all of Asia Pacific. Some examples from Malaysia and China here, just a wheat-based grain cracker with lentil, and it contains a plethora of grains and oil seeds, over 13 different ingredients that include red lentil. So it really brings in a really nutrient-dense product. On the right there is soda biscuits, they call it, with pea fiber, so not lentil per se, but it contains more than 3% dietary fiber, which makes this product eligible to make a claim about maintaining normal intestinal function. And so this product is from Mondelez. So this is Asia, and then I wanted to also highlight in North America, there's a hyper focus on free from. This really dominates the natural claims category for cracker launches, and so this is North America top claims on crackers, and it's a percentage share of total cracker launches between 2020 and 2025. And majority of these claims are free from, whether it's GMO free, additive free, free from preservatives, allergens, flavorings, artificial flavorings, gluten-free, um, no animal ingredients. So this is really creating a product that, actually in the US, we have more of these snack cracker products where you're snacking on it. And so you want something really clean, really natural, and that you can really enjoy the flavor and the textures of. And get any kind of nutrient that you might want. So some examples on the next slide here are, highlighting that free from claim opportunity. And so from the left here, we have from the ground up, we have a cauliflower veggie cracker made with a blend of gluten-free flours. It's low allergenicity. Cauliflower. It's made with cauliflower, rice, cassava, lentil, and potato starch, and it contains 2 grams of protein and 2 grams fiber per serving. So it does allow you to make a fiber claim here. On the middle, we have Adira Foods. It's a gluten-free cracker made with alternative flours, so tapioca, cornstarch, green lentil flour, and rice bran. And it's really a clean label. It's positioned as a simple everyday food. You're going to consume it daily on its own, or you can add toppings to it. So really a vehicle for other toppings, and really leveraging that texture. So crispy, flaky, and full of flavor. And then lastly, on the right, we have a lentil cracker made with a blend of corn and lentil flour. So a really nice pulse cereal blend. It's gluten-free, non-GMO, and contains 3 grams of protein and 3 grams of fiber per 28 gram serving. So it really packs it in there. So these are just some examples of some crackers in the US or North America that really leverage that free from claims. So we talked about, so this is really just summing it up. We talked about the market landscape and how pulses fit, and showed some examples that are in the commercial space. But we can really see that pulses are a little bit niche still, lentils particularly, but they have been steadily growing in this cracker category. And chickpeas are leading at the moment, but lentil flour is emerging in these cracker formulations, whether it's gluten or gluten-free. We're going to hear a lot about the R&D side of how lentils fit crackers. And then lastly, we believe that there's a lot of opportunity to leverage the consumer familiarity with lentils and their existing interest in eating more of these lentils. And this is alongside the current successes that we're seeing with chickpea and pea usage in this category. So lots of opportunity with lentils and crackers. And that will conclude my presentation that sets the stage for the next section. So thank you.
All right, thanks, Tanya. I think that's really good context heading into the next presentation here. So just keeping in mind just the general size and growth of the category, broadly applicable to many different geographical regions. I think that better for you interest in terms of added protein and fiber is something that's very relevant to how lentil flour can bring something to the table, as well as just good fit, I think, for this category as a whole. So next up, we're going to bring on Amy and Anna. So they're here to talk about a collaborative research study that was just wrapped up with Pulse Canada and Prairie Research Kitchen, funded through NSERC's ARD program. So this project, we were looking at opportunities to incorporate lentil flour in gluten-free snack cracker applications, and then did a lot of work in terms of optimizing formulations and the process itself to help to improve the final quality of that cracker. So I will pass things off to Amy and Anna here to provide an overview of the results.
Yeah, thank you, Janelle. So welcome, everyone. I'll say good day, depending on where you're joining from. My name is Amy Dahl, and I'm the research manager at Prairie Research Kitchen. We conduct applied research through Red River College Polytechnic at the intersection of science and culinary creativity to come up with innovative solutions for our industry partners. So in this case, we were working with Pulse Canada. And this is Anna, our research technician and chef. She is a Red Seal chef, culinary graduate from the college. She has expertise exploring ingredients and their performance in various culinary applications. This project aimed to demonstrate the feasibility of incorporating lentil flours into gluten-free snack crackers. And again, with the nutrient profile of a wheat-based cracker, it's nice to work in a gluten-free space because you're actually adding micronutrient and nutrient value to that application, whereas with a wheat cracker, you're adding on top of what's already existing. So because the gluten-free flours are typically starches, it's nice to add some protein and micronutrients that the lentils bring. So this was a great application for us to explore. We looked at strategies through modifying the formulation and method of production to optimize dough handling and sensory characteristics, and ensuring that there's structural integrity for the crackers through how we modified the formulas. We assessed 4 different lentil flours. We worked with 2 different dehulled red lentil flours from different companies, knowing that different cultivars and then different methods of processing those flours, even at that level, would confer different functional properties for the flours. So that could result in differences in what we observed in the crackers. And then we also looked at a heat-treated red lentil flour, knowing that heat treatment might reduce some of the off flavors that you would observe with some of these flours. So seeing that as a comparison to the dehulled. And then, a complete sidebar, flour, a whole grain lentil flour was also evaluated as part of this study. We looked at different ingredient profiles for commercially available crackers to come up with either our retail control or the formulations we were exploring. So we looked at Mary's gluten-free crackers. And then in this study design, we were replacing into a commercial gluten-free flour blend. So we were using Bob's Red Mill 1-to-1 gluten-free blend. So that's mostly starches again. So you're not getting a lot of nutrient out of that flour blend. So we were adding protein, fiber, and all of that lentils confer. To formulate the crackers, we decided to evaluate replacement in that flour. But because you would be taking away some of the xanthan gum, we had to add some of it back in. So we had a plan at the onset to make sure that we weren't losing functionality important for the integrity and quality attributes of the crackers. For quality assessments, we had chef observation of different dough rheology qualitative parameters. And then we did some instrumental testing, and we did some sensory evaluation of the optimized crackers once we got to the right formula, the right method to get the dough handling to be as optimal as possible and to get the most tasty crackers out of each of the flours. So trials assessing the inclusion rate of the red lentil flour identified a threshold of approximately 50% for the red lentil flour, whereas green lentil flour kind of maxed out at 20%. We looked at other ways to improve the handling and the end cracker. So one parameter that came up, almost like levers for ensuring that high quality end cracker, adjusting the hydration time. By exploring into that and adjusting the duration of hydration, we got improved flavor out of these crackers and even handling. And so that allowed us to go even higher in our incorporation rate as well as the mixing speed. We were using a RoboCoupe mixer, and we switched to a globe mixer, and we were able to adjust to slower mixing speeds to allow more even hydration and prolonging that process. And because of that, again, we were able to push the higher incorporation rate. And then we looked at different thickness levels, kind of at the boundary of different commercially produced, industrially produced crackers. So we looked at a very thin cracker. So gluten-free cracker formulations tend to have a struggle at the thinner cracker range. They don't have they lack structural integrity that gluten confers. So it's nice to explore if the lentil protein could add any structural integrity at that thinner end. And then we went to the higher, thicker cracker end as well. And then the last thing we looked at was that higher inclusion rate. We were able to push all the way up to 50%. Knowing we want to add nutrition value to these crackers, going higher with the inclusion rate was a goal of ours because you really want to see that protein come up, the fiber come up, and we wanted to see where that upper bound was. So getting up to 50% was valuable. So here are the representative images of different crackers and the different flours, and we start with the retail control. So basically, we see the lentil protein addition confers a lot more browning to the cracker. Our our actual reference control formula that we tested out, you see a very neutral color, very pale, so we can introduce that red lentil color that we knew was coming. The retail control that we used has paprika in it and like other flour blend ingredients that probably contribute color as well. And you can see that it had black pepper, so that's giving a little bit of the appearance that is different and less uniform. But with our red lentil crackers, both the dehulled gave more like a speckled marbling appearance, whereas the heat-treated cracker had a more uniform color across the cracker. And then overall, like the visual characteristics shown in the photographs illustrate the influence of that lentil flour, so that Maillard reaction, the browning. You limit the need to have a like an allergen introduced like whey protein to get that classic golden brown color. And you just get it naturally through inclusion of the red lentil flour. With the heat treated, it's less prominent, which was a little bit surprising, but neat to see. So I see some questions around what was being tested, and for the next couple slides, we'll walk through the different instrumental testing so you'll get some clarity there. But first we looked at the different color. So you saw through the representative images how the colors differed between the different crackers. So we saw the top surface. So this is what's presented as the top surface of the PRK control cracker being slightly lighter. You can see that now through the data. Much less saturated and had a paler, more muted yellowish hue. The cracker prototype using the heat-treated red lentil flour is more like the retail control across all of the color parameters. So you see similar numbers presented there. Slightly warmer, redder appearance, and both dehulled samples were darker with a warmer, redder tone. Sorry. There we go. The slides all look the same. Sorry. So the texture for the red lentil cracker is presented here. So compared to the retail control, the PRK control that we were looking at was much softer and more flexible and required less energy to break. The heat treatment on the lentil flours, we know that modifies the starch and the protein functionality. And we saw the heat treated, and one of the dehulled samples was even softer compared to the other crackers and less flexible. The second company's dehulled sample was firmer, but still softer than that retail control. So the retail control had the hardest texture overall. But introduction of the lentil flours in brought all of the crackers closer to what that retail control was presenting as. So for gluten structural replacement in the system, we know lentil proteins can provide structure but lack that elasticity. So we depended on the combination of starches from the commercial flour blend, and we added that xanthan gum and hydrocolloid in to support that final structure and give crackers that snap. And our chef noted that there was a really pleasant snap with all of the crackers at the different thickness levels. We had gone up to that 50% inclusion and assured presence of that xanthan gum was there not only to support the dough handling, but again, that final, to ensure there wasn't that brittleness and fragility of crackers at the end, but there still could be some improvements made on that final hardness and the deformation for these crackers. So even at the dough level, the hydrocolloids stabilize the dough, creating that cohesive matrix, which is critical for machinability and uniform spread during baking. So that was some of what we were looking at with adding in the xanthan gum and making sure it stayed at a level that would support the gluten structure of these crackers. For our sensory evaluation, we used a 9-point hedonic scale applied to rate the overall appearance, the odor, the flavor, the aftertaste, mouthfeel, and acceptability. The mean scores are presented for each attribute with 9 panelist responses. So the highest number you could achieve for each of these would be a 9. And the lentil flour, we know it can impart earthy or beany notes and sometimes bitterness. We expected the dehulled to have reduced bitterness from the removed fiber, and then the heat treating to reduce the off flavors and enhance the more nutty notes. And to our surprise, we actually saw the heat treated favored for appearance and less so for the flavor, coming out on the bottom end of the score. And the the chef notes through the prototyping process for the crackers actually noted that the heat-treated crackers were favored and had a better flavor. So when we got into the sensory evaluation and saw the opposite, where the dehulled seemed to be more favored for flavor, that was surprising to us. But it goes to show that the flavors that are contributed by the lentil flours are overall accepted, depending, no matter which flour was used. And I should also note, sorry, for the instrumental testing, we brought the optimized red lentil flour crackers forward. We didn't include the green lentil flour in these evaluations. So it was kind of a side-by-side comparison of those dehulled from each company against the heat-treated, and then against our PRK reference control formula where we plugged those lentil flours in. There was no other statistically significant outcomes from the sensory evaluation, again, just showing general acceptability of lentil flour incorporation into crackers. I think that the thicker crackers were a little bit too thick, and the panelists noted that exploring something in between that very thin and very thick cracker thickness would be ideal for the optimal cracker thickness. So I will pass this to Anna now to go over our experience with the whole grain lentil flour.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Like Amy was sharing, we just sort of did some gentle exploring into the whole green lentil flour in the snack cracker. Not because of the lack of its capabilities, but more so the promising of the red lentil, and it was just favored throughout our handling processes and baking. However, the whole green lentil flour, yes, like Amy mentioned, it tolerated up to about a 20% inclusion before we started losing maybe we had some handling issues, and then there was some coloring and just sensory issues, and then with flavor as well. It kind of, during the handling, it was showcasing, it almost seemed like like it says, like a wet, slimy, paste-like kind of texture, which required a bit longer of a hydration step, which is expected to be with most pulse flours. So with this, it was a little more challenging to work with, and it just wasn't the right consistency in what would be like a commercial setting. It would be more of a challenge, I think. Again, just further exploration into this would be something that we'd look into to further optimize and mitigate this issue. When we had just some informal sensory around the green lentil flour, there was a much stronger kind of a beany vegetal odor while handling. However, again, with not just the green lentil, but red lentil as well, through the baking process, it kind of masks a bit of that beaniness, and it doesn't get rid of it completely, but it definitely improves the flavor. We mentioned the color of it. Unfortunately, I don't have a photo of it to show you, but it definitely was kind of a brown gray kind of coloring. It had kind of an uneven kind of graininess on the surface, which could be unappealing, or you could even lean into that perceived kind of health, better for you kind of look. So it could look very whole grain, it was a very kind of greeny gray color. So you can look at that either way. But there's definitely some ways that you could look at improving that as well. Texture, yes, there was some grittiness. I think a lot of that comes with the fact that we also were using the Bob's Red Mill, which contains rice flour, which inherently has that kind of gritty texture. And so, as with the red lentil and the green, the higher the inclusion, the less grittiness it became, just because you were reducing the amount of rice flour, because the lentil it doesn't offer that same grittiness, which definitely was a plus. Lastly, we tried to kind of mitigate some of that flavor by adding seasoning just on the surface. So after the crackers came out of the oven, a light spray of oil and then tossing in a seasoning. Didn't really work very well. I think it would have worked better had you incorporated the seasoning into the dough, because you were getting the seasoning right with the initial bite, but then you would get into the cracker and then it was not a very well balanced and cohesive flavor. But again, more play around that could show better results. So because of this, we kind of discontinued our exploration into the green lentil formulations. But again, I'm extremely hopeful for this green lentil flour. It showed really awesome attributes as well. So I think it would just require a little further exploration into this. So getting into the red lentil cracker dough handling, there wasn't a whole lot of difference between the different red lentil, between the dehulled and the heat treated. However, there were some minor changes that we made to get that optimized cracker. So, like as Amy mentioned, we had initially started with a RoboCoupe, with the hopes of kind of achieving that kind of biscuit method where you cut the fat into the flour. However, we were noticing the texture of handling, it was unevenly hydrated. So we tried different mixing speeds and hydration times. So at the lower end of hydration, obviously it wasn't evenly hydrated. We got up to about a 24-hour hydration period, and noticed that was kind of where we had nice handling and evenly hydrated throughout. Any longer didn't really make that much of an improved difference to warrant a longer hydration period. With the slower mixing speeds, we were able to reduce the stickiness of the dough. And then, of course, with the more even hydration, it was easier to work with, whether you were doing with a rolling pin or through like a commercial sheeter. Still did require the parchment paper, just because the nature of gluten-free dough and slightly fragile, but again, a lot easier to work with that even hydration. We noticed that there was a kind of this perceived sort of greasiness on the surface of the dough. We're not sure, if it was, fat coming out of the dough, or if it, maybe was a starchiness that was kind of being hydrated and it kind of had that sensation of greasiness. But it didn't really affect the final mouthfeel, because after the baking, crackers were not greasy to the touch, and they were still quite pleasant. So the higher lentil flour inclusion, yes, it kind of did result in a tougher dough, but still quite easy to handle. It was still quite malleable, and didn't really affect being able to roll it, whether again with rolling pin or through a commercial sheeter. We did notice that at 50%, the red lentil flour, we start losing some functionality as far as handling. You might get some fragility working with it. That's why, like, even the really, really thin crackers were a little more challenging. So that's why finding that kind of happy medium between the really thick and the really thin was better for handling. Yeah, so as we mentioned, the green lentil flour only tolerated up to about 20% before we were having some hydration and sensory issues. As I mentioned, the parchment paper was required just because the dough was a bit sticky when handling just with your hands, or with rolling pin would kind of stick to your rolling pin. Definitely helped with a little dusting of extra red lentil flour. We had tried dusting with the commercial blend, but of course it just added more rice flour, adding up to more grittiness in the final sensory. And then again, just it was interesting to note that the thinner crackers, they were more fragile. They had some bitter notes during sensory, whereas the thicker were a lot sturdier. However, they kind of brought forth more of that kind of beany vegetal aroma. So as mentioned, kind of finding that middle ground was the sweet spot there. So just to kind of, again, go over the slower mixing speeds produced a more tender cracker. It reduced some of the beany flavor, and it had a lot more uniform hydration, which was interesting. It just kind of gave that flour a chance to hydrate before it had that 24-hour hydration, rather than that high shear, which kind of introduced, some kind of off notes and stronger beany flavor. So as mentioned, that sweet spot for hydration was around the 24-hour mark, and that was being wrapped tightly and put in the fridge, whereas shorter hydration, even 6 hours earlier, just produced slightly kind of crumbly edges when rolling out, showing that it hadn't been evenly hydrated, and just was a little more difficult to work with. Rice-based gluten-free flour blend required adjustments for texture. So as we had mentioned, the Bob's Red Mill contains those rice flours. So it did produce kind of that grittiness, whereas we had added xanthan to just improve handling, because we were losing a bit as we incorporated more of the lentil flour. We were losing some of that functionality of the xanthan in the commercial flour blend. Again, we were able to push it up to about 50% of lentil flour with these optimization steps. Like mentioned, we kind of had that film or that greasiness that we felt in the handling of the raw dough. However, again, with post-bake, it did not really come through with sensory. The interesting side was the flours, the colors of the flours. So the dehulled flours, as you saw in the photos a few slides back, kind of had a darker, uneven, kind of spotted surface color. And then the heat treated flour was quite even across the top. And our panelists noted that, and they preferred that. However, the flavor of the dehulled flours was preferred. So I mean, I still kind of feel like we've only just scratched the surface of using red lentil flour in this cracker application. So like further exploration could, include, we tried cutting the fat into the flour with the food processor, but that showed that it gave a sandy texture, whereas the slower mixing speed achieved better tenderness. So it was a better texture overall. And then, of course, we find that the gluten-free doughs do need to be slightly thicker just for handling purposes. We find, of course, the gluten-free, we don't have that structure of gluten from wheat. So it can be a bit brittle at times and a little more fragile. So kind of exploring the right thickness there. There could be a wide variety of flour blends that might work better, other than the Bob's Red Mill, of course, that could improve textural and handling attributes. And then, of course, the introduction of dough conditioners could also be further exploration into that. And then one thing that we noted, of course, as you saw, the kind of orange-red colors of the crackers could lead into some kind of neat flavorings. So, if you look at cheesy flavored crackers, or even, we have some Mediterranean flavors, rosemary and tomato or sun-dried tomato. The red lentil really kind of lends itself into kind of a flavored cracker. So further exploration into that would probably prove to not only produce a tasty cracker, but it might mitigate also some of maybe the off notes or beatiness that the lentil might provide.
So that does take us to the end of our part of the presentation. I think maybe some of the questions that are presented on the side have been somewhat answered, but I'll touch on a couple of them directly. So as far as dough rheology, we did not do instrumental testing on that. We used chef guided notes to reformulate or to optimize, determine different treatments. So that was just based on chef evaluation, subjective observation. And then for the inclusion rates tapping out, that also was determined based on chef notes. So basically, testing out an incorporation rate, and then the chef trying the crackers, or informally some of the other people at PRK, semi-trained panelists who often participate in our sensory evaluations, but just trying the crackers and giving feedback on what direction to take the formulation or adjust the method. And so for tapping out, it was either handling the brittleness of the dough or a taste preference that guided the next steps and how to adjust. So that would be how that was determined.
And I would say I wouldn't even limit it at the 50%. It was just in this particular formula. So with further adjustments, there is that possibility of pushing a higher inclusion of the red lentil into the crackers for sure.
Mm-hmm. I see one other question too around clean label options around a xanthan gum alternative, and that comes up often actually. So we know psyllium husk can offer some advantages, a little bit more tricky in a cracker application, but it would be worth exploring, even just gum combinations and different formulas to see how the lentil flour, the balance of the protein and the starches, different ratios of that. And then maybe you limit how much of a hydrocolloid you would need to add in. Maybe it's just a reduced amount as opposed to a complete replacement, but different combinations or psyllium husk could be worth exploring, or adding in a different protein isolate that could add that functionality as well. And would also complete an amino acid profile for nutrient considerations for those crackers. Janelle, is there any other questions or points you want touched on?
Yeah, so I have a question which I think is likely in reference to Tanya's presentation. So I don't know if she's on the back end and could get brought up, but just a reminder to our audience members, you are able to pose your questions in that Q&A tab. But Tanya, you had referenced on one of your slides an improved sustainability profile as one of the advantages of incorporating a lentil flour into crackers. And I'm just wondering if you can maybe provide a description on some of the ways in which you're able to kind of quantify that claim, whether or not that was based on an LCA carbon footprint study, or if we have any data to kind of substantiate that specific claim. You're on mute. Yeah.
Sure, I can answer that. So, we talked about lentils, we talked about pulses, which are legumes that are, a nitrogen fixer. And so there's I mentioned there's a very good sustainability story to tell. So we have done at Pulse Canada a formal LCA on lentils. So on the pulse itself, from planting, like from on farm up to harvest. And so there's also the post-harvest element. And so really depending on the technologies with the crackers, a more tailored LCA would need to be conducted. But because, as I mentioned, that lentils are a legume, they fix nitrogen, they are able to convert that nitrogen from the air into the soil, relieving the farmer from having to add more fertilizer. So that really does reduce that greenhouse gas emissions. And then they're also quite drought tolerant. So, in terms of water use is quite low. And amongst us, a whole host of other practices like no-till and so on. All of this really translates into a lower output in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, and so all this is summarized in an LCA report that is available online, specific to lentils, but we also have it for the other pulse types, and that can be shared with you online, but also the full report can also be shared as well.
That's great, Tanya. And I would also add, we have looked at trying to kind of do models of what that would look like in food formulation. So in the past, we've looked at lentil and pea flour inclusion in breakfast cereal, pasta, and bread formulations, just to demonstrate the feasibility of getting those greenhouse gas reductions or an improved sustainability profile. But that will be dependent on the formulation. So those are more illustrative, and you'd have to take. That's why we have that LCA on the kind of whole lentil and production lentil as that source of the material going into formulations, but ultimately it's going to be dependent on the final formulation iteration at an individual company level. But that we can also share as well as follow up, just to provide kind of that illustrative example of how incorporating some of these pulse ingredients in formulation could reduce the footprint of a finished product. Another question here is if particle size was analyzed on the flours for this particular study. And I'll just point to that, highlight the report again. We did receive the particle size of just based on sieve methods from the suppliers that we sourced the flours from, and that's highlighted in the report as well. But there were very different this particle size distributions. One was very, very fine, and then another was quite coarse. So contrasting particle sizes based on the two flours that were looked at. It's great. I will leave maybe one more minute for questions here, but in wrapping up, I think I want to thank all of our panelists for presenting here. I think it's very insightful. There's a lot of really interesting details in that report. If you want to dive into the juice of that study in particular, just looking at how hydration rates, how mixing speeds can all impact the final quality of that cracker. And then it goes a little bit more into the details of just some of the differences we saw between the four flours as well. I think that's something that's important to consider from a commercial perspective, is as you'll be receiving flours from multiple different suppliers, and just because they work differently doesn't mean that you can't work with them. So I think to Anna's point, even if it doesn't work in a specific formulation, there's a lot of opportunities to adjust the formulation or adjust the process in order to really maximize that quality. And we kind of dived into some of the examples there. But if you have any further questions, then you can absolutely reach out, and we'd be happy to help answer. But I think we're right almost on the minute, so almost perfect timing. So I'll wrap things up here, not seeing any further questions. And thanks everyone for attending, and we'll hopefully be back soon with another webinar. So thanks everyone.